So what I want to move on to here is talking a little bit more specifically about some of the pain points that we have seen with our clients' submissions, specifically for 3D printed devices. What I want to lead with, though, is that FDA's thinking and outlook on 3D printed devices is continuing to evolve month by month, year by year. It changes. And obviously, another thing to keep in mind is that any unique submission to FDA does involve a degree of reviewer subjectivity. So I think sort of one of the challenges that we have at JALEX a lot of times is a lot of people tend to look at FDA as sort of this machine that you feed a submission into and it spits out a clearance on the other side. And obviously, that's not the case. There's a human review team. There are educated scientists on the other side that are looking at your submission. And so it's our job to clearly present sort of the device, the underlying data, and our arguments for it so that these people on the other side can look at it, understand it, and it is meeting the requirements that they have for a safe and effective medical device. So some of the topics here that we have found have been a challenge specifically for 3D printed devices. One of them is ensuring that there are adequate details of the manufacturing process defined in the submission. So one example would be specific 3D printing machine information that you're using. So FDA wants to know make, model, number of machines, like the exact details of the machines that you're specifically using and validating to create your production devices. Worst case manufacturing conditions is another one. I've called out one pretty easy example here would be build plate positioning. Obviously, there are a huge number of different parameters that you would need to consider, but you need to be able to define your worst case manufacturing conditions with data and show that to FDA. Performance testing, another key one. I've called out test coupon testing here. That's something obviously specific to the 3D printing world that doesn't exist and isn't really relevant in the traditional manufacturing world, but having test coupon data and how that relates to your process validation is important in regulatory submissions. Manufacturing residuals, this has been much more of an FDA focus lately, specifically the removal of particulates from the product after it's been printed. So this is, again, a biocompatibility concern. And we have seen much more FDA focus on this in the recent years than perhaps they did maybe a handful of years prior. And the last one is build process validation. So I'll actually dedicate the slide after this to process validation, but this is sort of, I guess, the overarching theme of needing to include all of this other information in the submission. So process validation is something that for a medical device manufacturer, you need to be validating your processes anyway per FDA's quality system regulation, so 21 CFR 820. But specific to 3D printing, it's important that you clearly define all of the build parameters and are validating your process. So again, you can show FDA with data that your build process is able to consistently reproduce your printed device across build cycles. So it's great if you can print one device, mechanically test it, and it passes your test, meets all your acceptance criteria, but FDA wants to be convinced that your process is able to repeat that over time, reproducibly and reliably. And so the last thing on this slide that I want to make note of is that anytime you have a validated process, any changes to your device, changes to the process, or process deviations that you see, you need to be taking those into account to then determine if you actually need to revalidate the process later on down the line.